Okay. Welcome back, fellow listener. Welcome back to our adventure throughout all the books of the Gygax setting. You listen well, all the books. Then, in the last two lives, we begin to read the Saga of Old City. The absence of the D in the Saga of confused a lot to me. So, anyway, Saga of Old City. The first book written by Gygax, and the first book in the Gygax Adventure series, and the first book of the Gord the Rogue series. A lot of firsts in this phrase. Then, last time, we see how our hero, Gord, enter in the Beggars Union, an association of beggars who want to take the role of the Thieves Guild. Well, the Thieves Guild was not happy for this, so a war exploded, a silent war. Then our hero with his companion, Sun, take off on a group of thieves and capture one of them. Then, let's see how the story continues. My usual sip of water. Chapter 6. Life aboard a gypsy barge was strange to Gord. Not that he minded the change, but it was odd. The group had managed to get through the river quarter and through the cargo gate to the wharves beyond. Instead of seeking some ship, however, they had gone up towards Shacktown and met friendly Renee bargemen there. Just what their instructions had told them to expect. Before dawn, the still unconscious thief had been bound, gagged, and rolled into an old carpet. A peddler's wagon would soon have the prize moved to a place from where it could be spirited into the beggar master's mansion. And the prize he was indeed. Guarded these courts had learned from a knowledgeable barger that the fellow was none other than David Northsea, a great thief, swindler, con artist, and impersonator. Some said that he was a likely candidate for guildmaster one day soon. Score one for Theobald and for Gord. Now the two boys and three Sellsworth were housed aboard a small fleet of barges sheltering in a small backwater between the docks and the sprawl of Shacktown. This was now to be their base of operations, according to new instructions received by Gord from the peddler who had picked up their merchandise. When he found that the new orders were addressed directly to him, Gord was fluttered and a bit flabbergasted. He was just entering his 13th spring, he guessed, and was not used to being treated as anything other than a lad. Now the beggar master was having orders passed on to him as if he were an adult and an important minion of the Union at that. In the deepest voice he could muster, he had told the three fighting men of the change, and they accepted his instruction without a blink. Perhaps this was because of the new dirk that swung openly from his belt in these relaxed surroundings. But the trio of mercenaries did actually treat both Gord and Sun with some respect, not considering them equals, perhaps, but at least worthy associates, with skill in their own callings. Sun revelled in this exalted status, and Gord felt much the same way, but, as befits a leader, he kept his feelings more to himself. The Renee were a puzzle to Gord. They were smallish and dark, much as he was. They seemed enthusiastic and bashful all at the same time. They spoke loudly yet in a self-effacing manner, but they were quick and very quiet when they wished to be so. The Renee is one kind of humans in the world of Gygax. That they could fight and steal, God knew. The mercenaries showed these folks healthy respect, and Gord had heard many tales extolling their virtues as thieves. Fortunately, they were not allied to the Thieves Guild. Gord realized that they were too free-spirited and independent to accept such an arrangement, and this was apparently why they had chosen to cast their lot on behalf of the Beggars' Union, which was also resisting the pressure of the Guild in its own distinctive way. Somehow, Gord felt there was more to this Renee than met the eye. Without committing himself to any firm conclusion, Gord suspected that the Renee were quite unusual and something to be reckoned with. If the men were interesting and capable, their womenfolk were doubly so. The girls were mostly breathtaking in appearance and bold in behavior, to a point. But the elder female seemed to be something mystical, a cross between seer, witch, and clerical matriarch. The young women deferred to the men with respect and downcast eyes, while the old women were deferred to in turn by the toughest of the men. That circle appealed to Gord. He'd happily have a lovely and submissive concubine while seeking guidance and wisdom for his actions from a grandmother. But then, Gord was young and understood little of life. When they weren't making excursions into the city, all 5 of the Beggar Master's agents were dressed as barge folk, brightly garbed in satins and gaudy accessories. They moved freely among the 24 interconnected barges. No watcher would suspect that they were anything other than a Renee. They had been here for more than a fortnight now, and 3 other trips to the Strip and Nick Boring districts had netted them little in the way of hostages for Theobald. Several dead thieves could be credited to their activity, however, and all of them had acquired a fair amount of spoils from their efforts on behalf of the cause. But Gord had the feeling that their luck would not hold for much longer, and he had begun to yearn for a change of scenery. Although staying on the barges was interesting and exciting, and this had certainly proved to be an effective base from which to carry out further raids on the thieves, he was eager to get back to find out what was happening in the thieves' quarter. Besides, he had a fair stash of coins hidden there and a score to settle with Theobald. Gord was feeling confident now that he would somehow be able not only to get revenge on the dirty fat bastard who had slain Violet, but also to profit big in the process. He was willing to trade his independence on the fringe of things for the chance to again be in the heart of the action, even if that meant being at someone else's beck and call. Anyway, he had promised a young girl named Adas, and that he would go with her to the waters of the near Dave one day soon. And he really believed deep inside that his fate would eventually return him to the Renee. Now it was time for other activities, however. "What's the matter, Gord?" Sam inquired forcefully. Gord was becoming irritable and restless. He just told his partner to bugger off for the 3rd time in about 15 minutes, and Sam was having no more of it. "Oh crap, it isn't your fault, Sam. Sorry. This just isn't right." "Hell yes, it's right." Sam shot back truculently. He was truly enjoying the freedom and the independence of their present position. Gord shook his head and explained. "The Beggar Master is a good tactician, that's the word, but he's a bad strategist. Spreading everyone around Grey Oak, putting us here to operate against the Strip, was smart. It's paid off." "So what's wrong? You arguing with yourself?" "Nah, son, the action is going to shift. Beggar Master Fatty has made the big mistake. I don't think the guild will ever allow itself to be flummoxed just because Theobald has kidnapped a handful of its members. Big shots or not, the guild has to beat Theobald and destroy the Union, or the thieves are through. And I want to be around Theobald when that happens. I want to be there when that rotten scum gets what's coming to him, or do it myself." Sam shivered a little of the vehemence of Gord's statement and made no reply. For Gord, the timing was right. Word came later that day. They were to leave their current base and return to Theobald's house. Every good man was needed there for a final confrontation, it seemed. They left immediately. After changing from renegade garb to their more mundane apparel, entering Grey Oak from this area was no problem. Each paid his iron drab and passed through the great gate. Without difficulty, all five made the trek from the dock area to the foreign quarter. There they separated, agreeing that each would find his own way back to headquarters to avoid attracting attention in a group. The mercenaries' stride never faltered as they passed through Black Gate into the old city, and the guards there never even looked up as they went by. Sun went in just as easily a few minutes later, and then Gord went last, after Sun had disappeared from his view. Despite the hostilities that had erupted, it was evident that those not obviously serving one side or the other were of no interest to anyone. Gord did not slow his step, emulating the fighters he had recently spent so much time with, for he felt himself as important now. He was coming home, more or less, to settle things. The northernmost section of the Thieves' Quarter was the locale controlled by the Beggars' Union. The Beggars' territory actually spilled over into the Slum Quarter, but Gord avoided that area, assuming that it would be watched closely. It would attract little attention where the Thieves' Guild felt secure. He reasoned, so he strode up Heaven Street and turned left on Red Cobble's Lane, not bothering to avoid anyone. Sooner or later, too, he would have to pass through the area between the opposing headquarters. When Gord turned north and began to follow Cleaver, a street that passed near Theobald's domain, he was accosted. "Hold it there, lady," a voice said. A thin, black-clad fellow stepped out of a nearby doorway, hand on sword. He eyed Gord suspiciously. Gord didn't feel intimidated at all. This surprised him a bit, for he still had memories of his gutless days. "What do you want?" he inquired firmly. "I want to know what you think you are doing, strolling around in a battle zone. Don't you know that this is the boundary between the thieves' territory and those dirty beggars yonder?" It was more of a warning than a challenge. Dressed as he was, Gord could have been an apprentice thief, some ally, or just about anything except a beggar. Gord certainly didn't want to cause sheen. Who knew what backup this sentry might have? "Sure," he said. "I have heard about the trouble, and I thought I would take a look to see for myself how badly we have frightened them." In broad daylight and armed, here Gord patted his side where his belt knife was secured. "None of those feeble cowards will dare bother me." "Cookie bastards, ain't you?" the man retorted. He looked closely at Gord and added, "Where are you from, anyway?" "Who the hell appointed you my master?" Gord spat back. He found himself actually incensed at this fellow's questioning. "I go where I choose, and need no permission from you, sir." At that the sentry looked. Before him was a youngster of tender years and scant size, armed with a knife no bigger than that with which the thief used to eat his joint of beef, daring him to contest his passage. "Well, you are no beggar anyway. If you want to get your throat slit, it's your affair, bandy boy. Have at it." With that, the fellow retreated into his doorway, and Gord passed by without giving him another glance. Although the area immediately beyond looked deserted, Gord felt a prickling sensation at scalp and spine when he passed gaping doorways and empty windows. There were eyes watching him, he knew. Then, a couple of blocks farther north, the streets began to show some signs of life again. Not much, but here and there a figure was out walking, a handcart being pushed, some tin shops still open and doing business. All told, however, this portion of the quarter was virtually closed. If this dearth of economic activity was any indication, Theobald and his associate were in deep trouble. As he talked about the impressions that this scene was creating in his mind, Gord realized that he no longer considered himself one of Theobald's servants. True, he was still officially bound to the fat creature who commanded the army of beggars, and in fact, he was now on his way to report to Theobald. Still, Gord knew that he was now something more than a tool of the beggar master. Abruptly, 6 young toads appeared before Gord, breaking his toes. Now, as he had expected, he would have to contend with sentries in the employ of the Beggars' Union. The leader of the group swaggered up to him, hands on hips, and surveyed him. Gordon knew that had he been a full-grown man with a long sword at his hip, the 6 never would have shown themselves, unless they could have ambushed with rocks from above. Now they felt confident that they had an easy prize. "Take me to Theobald and be quick about it," Gord ordered before the chief bully had spoken. The fellow's mouth dropped open at that, then clamped shut. "Screw you, you little pimp! Who in hell ya giving orders to?" "You fool," Gord replied. "I am Master Gord of the Beggars' Union, and my orders are taken direct from the Beggar Master. Now, either accompany me to the headquarters of Theobald or get out of my path. I don't care which you do, but unless you act quickly, you'll regret it." Gord had all he could do to suppress a smile as he watched the spectrum of expressions that passed across the young toad's countenance. Astonishment, fury, fear, and uncertainty paraded openly before Gord's gaze, as plainly as if the words themselves had been written on the oaf's forehead. How in hell do I know that you ain't a spy for them thieves?" the leader finally asked, groping for some way to gain the verbal advantage. Although his 5 associates had crowded closer behind him during the exchange, their proximity did not reassure him, and his tone of voice now contained a tinge of whining. Gord felt like calling him an asshole, threatening him further, and making all 6 of them switch some more. How often had he had to suffer the humiliation of fear and cowardice? But instead, he simply said, "Take me to Theobald, and if I am a spy, he'll deal with me." When the leader heard those words and saw the hard-eyed stare that accompanied them, he broke. "Nah, you're okay. I just had to check, see? Them's my orders." By the time these last words were out of the sentry's mouth, Gord had already marched around the group and continued on his way. His lips curled into a satisfied smile as he heard the leader's final plaintive cry. "Tell Master Theobald that Bugbear and his boy is doing a good job, okay?" Bugbear. A man named Bugbear. Okay. In stark contrast to the rest of the neighborhood Gord had seen, the area around Theobald's place was a beehive of activity. When he was in sight of his destination, slowly strolling along, Gord was taken aback to see a squad of the watch parade past in the street off to his side, and even more surprised to see a group of city officers entering the building. What was happening? He stayed back to observe more and was soon further mystified by the sight of several of the beggars he knew openly entering and leaving the place. This was not at all what he expected. To be on the safe side, Gord went carefully around the area, checking everything out. The whole place was filled with the same sort of activity, open comings and goings, and many important-looking folk mingling with the beggars and their ilk, all under the aegis of groups of the watch. Gord decided to make his way into the headquarters by means of a secret underground passage that began in a building a bowshot distant from the place. He was not about to take any unnecessary chances despite the seeming security. Nobody was in the hidden sub-cellar of the house when he entered, and Gord moved quickly through the place and up onto the main floor. There was action there aplenty, with beggars and their allies coming and going. Ferg notices Gord, approached him briskly, clapped him on the back, and congratulated him for the success of his group's mission. "Master Theobald's strategy was perfect," Ferg exclaimed. "And Ladavid's North Sea was the key to our success," he continued. "The other teams met with mixed results. We lost a couple and took several other thieves prisoner. Even killed a fair lot of them too. What's happening now? Gord asked. We did not see and the others in the back, explained Fergus. The master called for a truce. Both sides are still armed and waiting, but we are negotiating a settlement now. But what are the watch and the city officials doing here? His lordship the mayor doesn't want the warfare to continue, and that's a fact. Who knows what all rivalries will come up if it did. His emissaries told us that to avoid a possible division of the city into warring factions, they mediate the dispute and make certain that the Thieves Guild settle things on terms just for both sides. Something rang foul in this explanation. It sounded like something Fergus had rehearsed or someone else's words that he was repeating. But what could Gord say? At best, he was a youngster, even if he was a list master, and the relatively successful servant of Theobald. Fergus and a score of others here outranked him, not only in status but in age and experience. He did not openly question or contest what Fergus had told him, feeling that this was the truth as far as Fergus knew it to be. I'm heading for the audience room now to report. If he has time, I'll see if Theobald wishes you to appear. This is Fergus, wrong voice, sorry. I'm heading for the audience room now to report. If he has time, I'll see if Theobald wishes you to appear. Get something to eat, and I'll be back in a few minutes. So saying, Fergus turned and scurried off to see the head of the union. It seemed a good idea that Gord was feeling peckish, and something from the kitchen might not hurt, even if the stuff was loop. Better something than nothing. It come a long way, Gord thought, recalling how a rat-sullied chunk of grease coated bread had once seemed a feast to him, and how that vegetable swill had seemed to be nectar and ambrosia when he had first eaten in the beggar master's kitchen. Things had changed. Nobody was in the kitchen, so Gord helped himself to the best provisions he could find. Cheese, a fatty sausage of scant size, and a stale bun. No wonder the place was empty. It certainly didn't have much to offer. After finishing the meager meal and waiting for a half hour, Gord decided that Fergus would find him if the beggar master commanded his presence, so Gord headed for the upper loft. He said hello to some of the apprentices who were loafing around and then went to his own quarters. He was hardly surprised when a brief inspection revealed him that someone had searched the place in his absence. Everything had been put back in its place, so he supposedly wouldn't notice. But whoever had done the job had then discovered that he set things up just so as to be aware of rifling. A hair placed here, a strand of cobweb there had been displaced. Gord decided to check his case of money, not in the least worried that it had been disturbed. He pulled the old crate that served as his table and dressed over to an empty corner of the room, stood upon it and removed a splinter from the rafter overhead. The beam was old and dry, and the piece had been loose when it was assigned to the room. Gord had carefully worked it free and used his knife to gouge a space behind it, a place large enough to hold a handful of coins. Being more careful still, he had used the blade to drill and peg the beam and the splinter. When he replaced the broken piece, it stayed firmly in place, and his most careful scrutiny satisfied Gord that nobody would guess that the piece could be taken off without breaking it. Inside, he had first stored his few brass bits. Now the trove held far more than that. Gord took out the coins quickly, replaced the chunk, and moved the crate back where it belonged. He had the bronzes, copper commons, silver nobles, and one shining silvery gold electrum lucky to the purse he had tucked under his belt. They clinked against the pair of coins and the ring he already had in there. He stretched out on the lumpy cot, relaxed, waited for his summons, and dozed off. Gord, always a light sleeper, came awake instantly at the sound of a noise he did not know. What was it? The old building was full of noises. It creaked and settled by itself, and there were always other noises too. The voices and comings and goings of the many beggars who stayed here. But what had awakened him was something else. There again, it was a muffled thud from the chamber next to his. The wall between was thin, and Gord could hear more faint sounds through it now. It sounded unmistakably like a near-silent struggle to Gord, and he reacted swiftly, hoisting himself up soundlessly to the rafter above his cot. Then, a furtive footstep outside his door told him that his decision had been wise. From his perch on the rafter, Gord watched the door. The latch moved wheatily upward, and the portal swung inward with barely a creak. The dim light of the guttering tallow candle on the crate glinted off the reddened point of his sword. The hand and arm that held the blade swiftly followed it inside. Gord saw a little armored man scan the room quickly, noted the rumpled cot and the apparently empty room. The swordsman stepped in, felt the place where Gord had dozed only moments before, and grinned evilly. He stepped back from the bed, stooped, and thrust the short, bloody weapon into the place under the bed, where he imagined a frightened beggar thief was hiding. As he did so, Gord pounced. The force of his fall sunk the long dagger Gord held before him through the thick hide and padding, so that its full length buried itself into the would-be killer's back, just beneath his left shoulder blade. Gord's weight and the momentum behind his plunge felled the fellow as if he'd been pole-axed, and as he flattened on the floor with a whooping noise, the tip of the dagger bit into the wood and pinned him to the floor. This foe was a tough one, no run-of-the-mill thief, to be sure. Without outcry, the man tried to turn and get at the weight on his back, but the dagger held him immobile, long enough for Gord to take out his second weapon, the short knife, and strike again. His wild swing slashed the killer's right forearm as the fellow tried to ward off the blow. The wound caused him to gasp and reflexively drop his sword. Gord tossed away his shorter blade, and by lunging out and away from the man's body, managed to snatch up the invader's weapon. Even as the man freed himself from the floor, Gord was up and attacking again. The third time was the charm. The sword rose and fell, twice more before Gord was satisfied that the enemy was finished. Had he not taken him totally unawares and then had him pinned down, Gord knew that the man would have slain him. Gord was shaking and sweat-covered. He stood absolutely silent, holding his breath. Had anyone heard the fight? Was another murderer coming? No footsteps indicated this, and no outcry arose. Whatever was going on, apparently no one but Gord knew about it. With actions born more of instinct than intention, Gord searched the body of the dead thief. There were a few coins in the man's girdle, and Gord pocketed them without thinking. He returned his knife to its sheath on his right hip, drew out the great dagger, wiped it clean, and replaced it in the sheath between his shoulder blades. Finally, he took the belt and scabbard from the corpse. The belt was too large for his slender waist, but he used it as a hanger, slinging it over his right shoulder, and sheathed the sword on his left hip. Softly, Gord crept from his room and into the unlit corridor beyond to discover what was going on. He passed several open but dark doorways before the glow from a flickering lamp within one room allowed him to determine what was happening. The bloody truth was there before his eyes. Jank lay on the floor of his room in a pool of congealing gore. His corpse was covered with wounds, and his throat was cut. He had been the first of the masters, and the first renegade thief to enlist with the beggar master. Sirens. Further examination of a few more of the apartments told the whole story. Somehow, a band of thieves had penetrated the place. and set about killing the beggar thieves and beggar inside. Gord felt that it would be pointless for him to go higher in the building. They had probably started from above, assaulting the beginners and apprentices first after gaining entry from the rooftop, and worked their way down. As the least of the masters, Gord had been assigned the smallest room and the one farthest from the stairs. He was most thankful for that. Gord surmised that the man he had slain was the only one left on the floor, the one given the job of cleaning up the last bit of work before moving on. He decided he had better do something fast, for the killers would certainly be finishing the floor below by now and readying themselves for the final encounter, the settling with Theobald. Gord ran to a secluded back stairs that was hardly ever used and silently bounded down the steps all the way for the bottom, where the passage opened into the pantry of the kitchen. Gord saw light around the edges of the ill-fitting door that separated the storeroom from the commissary area beyond. Cautiously, he peered through a large crack to see what was going on. There was the gross beggar master, lantern in hand, followed by San straining under the weight of a metal box he carried, heading for the concealed entry to the sub-cellar. Gord jerked the door open and stepped out. The suddenness of his appearance made Theobald utter a startled gasp and nearly caused San to drop his burden. "What? Oh, it's you, boy! Don't ever do anything like that again, or I'll have you flayed and impaled down your eyes." All that was said in the beggar master's usual falsetto, but the threat was real. The fat man took a breath and continued in a slightly more rational tone. "Don't stand there like the fool you are. Help this weakling carry my chest. We must leave now." Gord said nothing and moved quickly to take one of the handles of the iron box from his small friend's grasp. Together they managed its weight easily, the box held between them. The beggar master had moved on ahead to the hidden portal, glancing back a couple of times to make sure that the boys were bringing the chest as he ordered. Theobald got the door open and stood aside as the pair struggled through. He then followed shut the portal and pulled a bar across it. "That should keep them out for a bit," he observed, then spun to face the two boys again. "Fortunate for you two rats that you have survived this debacle. I have been betrayed by none other than the Lord Mayor himself." Gord nearly snickered aloud at the rage and the heart in Theobald's tone. It seemed incredible to Gord that the fat idiot hadn't expected something like this to happen. What other result could have occurred, given the circumstances and the power of the two quarreling groups? As members of the ruling elite of Greyhawk, surely the thieves counted for far more than the lowly beggars, even with their associate fellows, all of them deserving of whatever vengeance the directors chose to mete out. How could that blubbery clown ever have imagined that a handful of hostages would tip the balance in his favor? It had always been but a matter of time before the guild master of thieves and his henchmen would strike. "How did you escape?" Gord whispered to San. "I heard the fight in the room next to mine, and I ran for my life," San whispered back. "I stopped to alert the master, and as a reward he made me carry his treasure box." He concluded, sarcastically, with a cold look in Theobald's direction. The beggar master did not overhear any of this because he was occupied. He had gone to a corner of the chamber and uncovered the mouth of a hidden well, yet another exit from the place, and one Gord had never seen. "Bring that box here," Theobald grunted. Gord and San complied, then stood waiting for what would happen next. "Put it on the floor, you little oafs," the beggar master said imperiously. "Can't you see that I need assistance in getting down the first part of this wretched ladder?" They rested the heavy chest on the stone flags, as commanded, and helped the obese man to carefully fin the first rung of the ladder that descended the side of the shaft. Theobald's pudgy fingers closed around Gord's shoulder, sending pains shooting into his neck, as the fat man nervously felt with his foot for the next step down. "Be careful now, you idiots," he blustered. One sleep is all it takes. It's 100 feet to the bottom of this cistern. When he got low enough, the beggar master released his grip on Gord's shoulder and grabbed the topmost rung of the ladder. Gord watched him slowly continue to climb down, moving forward to see into the shaft. Some 8 or 9 feet below, the floor level was a narrow ledge beside the iron rungs protruding from the stone blocks of the well. The beggar master stepped off the ladder onto this projection, and the light of the lantern that swung from his belt revealed the mouth of a small opening that led off to the side. Theobald looked up at the pair above, once again completely sure of himself. "I suppose I'll save you too! You have been faithful servants and can be useful still." He stretched his arms up and said, "Pass me the chest and then get your horses down the ladder. And be sure and close the trapdoor as you come down." Gord motioned San to one side, lifted the weight of the iron box by himself, and knelt beside the opening with the coffer in his arms. The burgomaster peered up expectantly as he saw the coffer come into view. "Give it to me, dolt!" Without a word or a glance downward, Gord let the box drop. There was a brief scream, a meaty sound of metal striking flesh, and then a long, drawn-out shriek that echoed off the walls of the old well before being cut off by a faint splash. "That was the bugger's treasure box, Gord!" "It was worth it," said Gord quietly, with a smile. Oh, sorry. Okay. End of chapter 6. And end of the life of Theobald, I think. Yeah, I'm not naked, be sure. I have shorts because it's damn hot nowadays here. A brief intermission, then we continue. Okay. I think we read another 2 chapters, I think, maybe 4. It depends on how long they are. Chapter 7 is pretty brief, so I think maybe 4. I don't know. Let's see. 3 or 4, it's the same for me. This one is very long, so but Theobald died, and now what is of Gord? I don't know. Let's begin chapter 7. It was a quiet night in the Rock and Oliphant. Sometimes the little tavern at the end of Barnbook Lane would be packed to overflowing, but not this time. Gord was the only customer. The young man sat at the back table where the senior students congregated when they were around, a half-empty pewter flagon of wine before him. He was at ease in the wooden chair, his mind lazily wandering through what had transpired in his life after he had slain the beggar master with his own iron treasure box. He and San had then made haste to get away, taking the side tunnel of the well shaft that the fat tyrant had planned to use for his own escape. They had found a way out easily enough, for the drain had long been sealed off and prepared as a route in case flight was ever called for. Thoughtful that fat bastard was, mused Gord. At the far end, near a manhole, they had found a large trunk full of gear stashed for a possible need. He and San had both found much usable in its contents. Some clothing, a sack to carry it in, materials for use in disguise that they took for later, and a pouch containing a pass that allowed unquestioned exit and entry through the various gates of Grey Oak for whoever presented it. Gord wondered about the origin of that benison as they opened the manhole cover and emerged into a closed courtyard in an abandoned building. Once they got into the outdoors, stealing away into the night was a simple matter. Gord had not dared to use the gate pass right away, fearing that its employment by one so young might arouse suspicion as to how it was obtained, but it had come in handy several times in the more recent past. Best of all, in the booty they had found were the coins hidden in the folds of a leather wallet and even half-dozen each of orbs and plates. Neither lad had ever seen real gold or platinum currency this close up before, and they took a minute or two just to look at them in wonder. Gold orbs were equal to 1,000 bronze Z's each, and the rectangular platinum plates were equal in value to 1,100 Z's, an orb and the lucky combined. Well beyond their highest hopes, a great boon indeed. But Gord remembered that when he had first held the coins, he could not help but wonder about the fantastic contents of the iron box. Perhaps it hadn't been worth it after all. Well, too late now. The first few months afterward had been trying for both of them. They had gone to the foreign quarter, supposing that the anonymity afforded them by that sector of the city would allow them to get settled and decide what they should do. Neither was certain if the Thieves Guild was looking for them or not. There could be a price on either or both their heads for all they knew. The foreign quarter had soon proved to be a poor choice. Two small boys, even lads who appeared competent and bore weapons, were something of a novelty. They were too noticeable. Some towed them prey, others curiosities, and so forth. They moved from place to place, seeking to avoid these unwanted intrusions on their privacy. A shabby inn here, a waterside boarding house there, and even a deserted shanty made into a secret den. Nothing seemed to suffice for long. Compounding their problems, both boys knew they must continue to exercise and practice. Even though this ran counter to their desire for seclusion, for neither had thought about abandoning the pursuit of their skills in the arts and crafts of thievery. Hate the thieves of the city they did, but not their profession. They found themselves forced to give up the foreign quarter when they bungled the job of pocket-picking on some foreigner whom both managed to underestimate. He set up a hue and cry after them as they fled, and the pair were lucky to escape that incident. That night, they moved out and into the quarter of craftsmen, just beyond the south wall of Old City. The place was safe enough as long as they kept a very low profile. They stayed in a dull hostel there for about 2 months, hardly ever venturing out. They paid promptly, and the hostler didn't ask any questions. However, staying low didn't make for fun, and they were young and fun-loving. It wasn't a place to work at thievery either. They did discreetly a few times, but their returns were hardly worth the risk and effort. Dreariness and confinement led to pacing and short tempers. After several senseless arguments and exchanges of blows, Gord and Son knew that they had to find a real place for themselves in this big city. Funds were not a problem. It turned out that Son also had a reserve of coins he'd managed to sequester, even without the orbs and plates provided so thoughtfully by Baggermaster Fettibald. The boys had been happily surprised by the size of their combined stack of coins. The worth of that hoard was near 1,000 Z's, and they had augmented their cash by clever applications of their mutual profession, so that they had not been forced to touch their reserve. Although it seemed probable that there was no active research for them and that no bounty was posted for their heads, they would be in trouble if any thief recognized them. This was very obvious, for there were still few beggars on the streets. Knowing full well that the upper part of Newtown was close to the likes of them, they tried to determine what viable territory remained for them to inhabit. After careful discussion and debate, it was agreed that the low quarter, the strip, and the river quarter were not conducive to their continued liberty and life. Either they could remain where they were, perish that suggestion, or or try the clerkbook. And while the latter thought had little appeal, staying put had less. Clerkburg was the district of the bureaucrats and the bookish. The upper end was filled with clerks, administrators, scribes, and the like, for it was near the halls, the government sector of the city, and the location of many of its religious edifices as well. The lower portion was given over to the colleges of Gygax University, with attendant housing, shops, and minor schools as well. There was no choice other than this, and off the two went as soon as was practical. As they soon had discovered to their mutual surprise, Clerkburg was a wonder unto itself. The great stone colleges and imposing cathedral lining the processional hid another world behind them. This area was dotted with mazes of interconnecting buildings, small walled parks, and other such obstructing physical features that formed the second line of defense between the world of academia and the rest of the city. Inside the Clerkburg were hundreds and hundreds of students, many of them nearly as young as Gord and Son. This was just the place for them. It was an easy matter to find an out-of-the-way place to stay. Their new digs, as they later learned to call their chambers, were in an ancient inn called the Acorns, near the great wall that surrounded the new city. Their host, Calvert, an elderly, red-faced man full of good humor and jokes, told them that his family had run the inn since before the wall was extended to encompass it. A narrow stone stairway led up to the rooms above the ground floor, which contained the bar, the dining room, the kitchen, and the hostler's own apartment. Gord and Son arranged to take the attic above the guest floor, and although it needed attention, they were delighted with it. Not only was it large and complete with several windowed gables, but a gnarled oak lifted its stout branches from the rear yard to the windows that looked over it, and unobtrusive means of egress and entry whenever they wished to go undetected. Their rent was 1 copper common a week, for a month if they paid that way in advance. Gord had paid month's price immediately, and they had stayed there at the Acorns ever since. Could it truly be almost 3 years already? Making good on their supposed reason for coming to the Clerkburg promised to be more difficult than Finden quarters had been. When they first took up residence in the academic area, the college term was over, and most students were elsewhere for several weeks until the new one began. But if Gord and Son were to be seen as students, they had to be students. The boys had to find someone to accept them as pupils. From his lessons in Theobald's Hall, Gord had developed fair proficiency with the pen, and he could read common speech as well as the basics of the modern Oeridian and Sewell languages. He could read maps, building plans, and some small amount of the writings used in spells. He could skillfully use the silent speech of the beggars, and understood much of the patois of both the Rennais and the Thieves' cant. Son had about half this much skill, all told, and both initially had felt rather confident at their prospects for entering some college. They hit upon the idea of becoming acquainted with an old sage by the name of Prosper, who dwelt nearby. The fellow grew herbs and puttered in his workshop when not reading. Since Calvert had once introduced them, the boys felt free to approach the old man. Their vast ignorance in all subjects was quickly made obvious to them, as the ancient scholar deluged them with what he claimed were simple questions, and neither lad could answer 1 in 20. "What are the 9 known dimensions of the multiverse?" the good doctor demanded. Son managed the 3 obvious ones: length, breadth, height. Astrality and ethereality, Gord added proudly, but he was stuck after that. Time, probability, extraconceivability, and non-conceivability, Dr. Prosper finished, and both boys squirmed. From whence came the common tongue? When was the empire of the hierarchy overthrown? What is leverage? How can you explain technology? Gord took a shot at that one. It is a myth of the ignorant used to fool gullible folk and frighten children. Nonsense, the elderly scholar retorted. It is the counterpart of magic within the dimension of probability and works in inverse proportion to it. Then he resumed firing off questions. Sorry, the old man voice is pretty hard to pronounce. My hearts hate me. What was the invoked devastation? And when did it occur? This one I know. You know it? Well, write in the comments. Of what use is basilisk blood in alchemy? Sorry. Enumerate the inner planes. There are 12. Name them. Relate the major deities of Earth to the minor ones, and explain how they relate to the forces of the lower planes. What is the largest tree known? Romwood, San shot back with relief. Good, said Prosper. And what vegetation and creatures are typically found in association with Romwoods? There was no reply forthcoming, so the sage continued his barrage. What are the characteristic differences between the races of man? Do they make us into different species, or merely indicate variations? Likewise, explain the racial differences of demi-humankind and relate them to humans. This is most unfair, Dr. Prosper. You are a renowned sage, said Gord, a twinge of desperation in his tone. Come, lads, the white-bearded chap said, shaking his head. What authority have you that I am renowned? No, quite the contrary. I am but a minor scholar now, put out to pasture, seen as being too old to have anything worth teaching today's students. The old man paused and fixed first San, then Gord with his stern gaze. That's not to say you both aren't abominably ignorant, though it is surprising that you know your letters so well. The boys looked at each other, but before either could think of any reply, the old man concluded the interview. I'd have mistaken you both for a pair of cleaned-up urchins from Old Town Way. But where will you find funds to be here, and how could you be staying in that loft you are furnishing at the Acorns? Then I suppose that you were a pair of precocious thieves, what with the funds you have and the sort of weapons you thought about. But then why would thieves be wishing to become educated? Therefore, I must conclude that you are a pair of bright lads from the back country sadly in need of edification and instructions. Lessons begin next water day, and you'll get only God's day free from them each week. That is, if you can afford the tuition. Again, Gord and San looked at each other in blank surprise. Well, come now, can you? It's the standard charge. 6Z per week, each, you know, and you must bring enough lunch to feed your teacher as well as yourselves. Studies were hard under the crotchety Dr. Prosper, but it was a mine of information. Although it was surely known to Calvert that his tenants attended no regular school, but were instead tutored by his neighbor, the good man never made mention of it. The drill continued for the whole time of the university sessions. The sage worked both boys hard, and they found that they had to do more than pay tuition to him and bring extra food. There were always things to buy: quill pens, parchment, blank scrolls, and books, and occasionally even a scribed text of some sort. Although Prosper would usually allow the boys to utilize his personal library under his keen-eyed surveillance. Grazie cespuglio. Although studies, homework, and occasional carousing took most of their time, both boys had promised themselves that they would not allow their more nefarious talents to grow rusty and forgotten. Things had quieted sufficiently so that they felt comfortable outside the district. On their one day of the week free from lessons, Gord and Son would walk with the stream of students drifting toward the strip. There, and in the fringes of the river quarter and low quarter as well, they worked at picking pockets, slitting purses, pilfering small items, and even the planning of mock burglaries, robberies, and executions. By these activities they didn't profit much, but enough, and neither was detected. How hot it is today! Damn. One day Sam brought 2 old locks back to the loft. He picked them up at the locksmith's for a small price, for both were old and in need of work. It became a game for them, first to repair such old locks, then to pick them open. Soon the place was littered with heaps of repaired and oiled locks, of all sizes and descriptions, that the two had mastered. Gord made a fair profit by peddling them back to the same locksmiths who had originally got rid of them. Son was pleased, talked Gord out of the money they'd made, and went out to find the best locks that their money could buy. In this fashion, studying, practicing, carousing, and lockpicking, the boys passed nearly a year and generally had a good time in doing so. What is the second symbol? Okay. With the end of the instructional term came news from Dr. Prosper. He informed the boys that teaching them had grown tiresome to him. They were slow students, always asking dumb questions, and generally trying the patience of a weary old scholar. No, he didn't deserve such punishment in his declining years. Instead, he had talked to some old associate at Grey College, and the troublesome fellows would be their charges next term. This was incredible news. Grey College wasn't the most fashionable institution, but it was the oldest and was renowned for its professors. Now they were true students. During the 9-week, the hiatus in summer that included Wilson Month, Rich Fest Week, and Reaping Month, the two celebrated continually. They also spent a lot of time at their work, so to speak. One of the first things they managed was a new wheelbarrow for Prosper, which they filled with gardening tools, a keg of Rentish schnapps, and wheels of cheese and huge sausages, and an assortment of old ale to top the load off. The doctor never mentioned it, but Gord knew he was pleased. Before their schooling began again, Gord also located an arms instructor willing to accept 2 young pupils who wished to learn the use of sword and dagger. For a while they had often practiced the non-violent crafts of thievery. They were both in need of bettering themselves at weapon play. College was not all that they had hoped. It wasn't just that the studies were hard. Their classmates were snobbish, and the dons were worse. Gord managed better than Son, for he was older, though by this time the younger boy had grown taller and larger than Gord. When their first year of instruction at Grey College ended, Son informed his friend that he had had enough of bookish pursuits. There was no arguing with him, and that week he went off to apply to the Thieves Guild as a cut purse, even though they both knew his skills were a notch or 2 greater than that. Son had met a pretty young lass in the course of one of the boys' forays on the strip. They were soon seeing one another regularly, and she had told him that her father was a ranking member of the guild, so Son had confessed his own skills. After that, nothing would do but for him to talk with her father, and the result was foregone thereafter. Gord and Son had a farewell party, and then the latter young man left their loft at the Acorns, promising to return often. He had come a few times at first, but the visits grew less frequent and shorter too, and then stopped altogether around Need-Fest break during Gord's next academic term. Gord maintained the big apartment alone, using the empty area as an exercise and practice space. Now his second year as a college student had come to an end, and Gord was undecided and restless. After all, how much did he need to know about politics, philosophy, natural and supernatural arts, pantheology, and the like? Sure, it was interesting to learn ancient dead tongues and the history of Oeric and the Flenes, but enough was enough. Gord liked action better, and he needed excitement, like the time he had tossed the light stone into the window of the professor of mathematics, and its light had revealed the dawn in a compromising position with the flighty son of a city official. Gord's fellows had been ringed around to see and had cheered. Gord wanted adventure, not lectures, scrolls, and tomes. He thought it was high time he put his lessons in the art of swordsmanship and dagger work to the test too. How much better than this sheltered life? Ciao, non leggo in italiano purtroppo, mi dispiace. 4 craftsmen from a nearby village entered the Rock and Oliphant and took a table nearby. Gord recognized them. They were staying at the Acorns while they attended a meeting of their chapter of the Artisans League. After ordering bumpers of the local brew, the 4 fell into conversation about their trade. Gord could not shut out this droning and endless shop talk, even by downing all of his wine and ordering more. When more of their fellows joined them, Gord abruptly decided that, as of this minute, he had had enough of this kind of life. He got up, stalked away to his chambers, and began gathering up his necessary possessions. An hour later, he bade the good ostler Calvert adieu, and exited the inn forever. Soon he was beyond the pale of Clerkburg, and striding up the processional. Since he had money to spend and wished some real action, he was going to the high water to see what he could see. It was time to start at the top. End of chapter 7. We make a brief pause. I drink a sip of water and then we continue. My knees. Okay. So I remember you, I'm not naked, but I'm in shorts. So you can see my naked leg, but I wear pants. So, I don't know if this is the last chapter of today, because it's very brief, only 8 pages. So I think we can read another one after that and end at chapter 9. So, let's try. Chapter 8. "A dragon!" exclaimed Lord Dolph. "You must now be 3 towers, your reverence." The Patricians' Club, a luxurious gaming house in Greyhouse High Quarter, had many tables, each offering a different amusement for those rich and noble gamers who sought excitement and the thrill of wagering fortunes upon chance. Little skill was required. Most of what transpired depended upon the spin of a wheel, the sum of oddly shaped dice, and similar devices where random patterns allowed long odds and dumb luck to reign supreme. At an ornately carved table in a special corner, however, a game that pitted players directly against each other was taking place. 5 wealthy participants were involved, and they had contested for several hours now. Fortune smiling first upon one, then another, so that not a single player had yet been forced to quit the table for lack of funds. The most notorious of the 5 was Arentol, the Grand Guild Master of Thieves, a tall, thin fellow of Saturnian nature and somber dress. He always watched the eyes of his opponents with an unblinking gaze. Next to Arentol was Sir Margus, a very young, a fat-looking Velounese. His age, combined with his title, indicated that he was undoubtedly the son of a great noble, and thus had gained his knighthood through means other than bold deeds. Adjacent to the Velounese knight was Madame Belderay. Velounese is a Veluna, is a nation, a region in Greyhawk. So Velounese is a man of Veluna, I think. The widow of Degol Belderay was certainly one of the richest commoners in the city, so wealthy that she could move in noble circles without question. She was plump and soft, and covered with jewels. In a pudgy middle-aged way, Madame Belle was attractive, so she was much sought after by men whose fortunes were in flux, so to speak. This night she was clad in brocaded silk of ivory and golden hues that nearly matched the colors of her fading blonde tresses. Just after Lord Dolph, the Baron of Cairnway, spoke triumphantly regarding his newly displayed tableau, Madame Belle smiled vacuously at the man to her left, Vronstein, a high priest of Zilkus, and said, "Oh my goodness, can you imagine such luck? Do you suppose you can beat Lord Dolph's 3 towers? What will you do?" Without comment, the richly dressed priest, seated between the lady and Lord Dolph, turned over the ivory plaque before him, his long pale fingers seeming to move contemptuously. He smiled as a green horse head was revealed on the river's side. "That makes a host of 4, I believe, Lord Baron." The sour expression that came over Lord Dolph's face as he viewed the emerald depictions of bow, sword, and spear capped by the horse showed that it was indeed a host, a powerful tableau. All of the men now turned to watch as Madame Belle took her turn. "That's not good at all," the plump dowager said in a tone of disappointment as her bejeweled hand exposed a plaque with the green magic sigil on it. Now, His Reverence the High Priest Vronstein could gain no all-conquering host, at least, but the Madame still had but a pair of coffers showing. She turned over 2 more of the ivory tiles, revealing the dwarf and the crown. The crown could build to a winning hand, but only if her 2 remaining plaques were likewise coffers, and those were long odds. With only 2 plays remaining for her, Madame Belle must either wager or yield. "I feel dreadfully lucky this evening," she stated enthusiastically. "So I shall increase the stake by another orb. No, by another plate." She pushed a platinum lozenge into the pile of coins in the center of the table. There was some surprise among the players when Sir Margus not only met the stake, but increased it by an orb. He had lost rather evilly this night, and now seemed bent on bankrupting himself by attempting to recoup it all in one losing hand. He showed 3 tiles up, a red sigil, and 2 gates. Arental likewise had 3 up and 4 plaques now, with 3 spears showing. "It seems that playing with a blessed cleric is unwise," said the guildmaster. He too had lost considerable sums. "I am caught between towers, His Reverence. A lady who feels Alicia's smiles upon her, and the risk-taker extraordinaire," he observed, "and worse, I think I can garner no 5th spear, even should the 4th be here," he added as he tapped his tiles, "so I must yield." He quietly turned over his exposed plaques and sat back. Lord Dolph placed his platinum and gold coins into the pot, and then His Reverence Vronstein increased the wager by yet another plate. Reluctantly, Madame Belle met it. Sir Margus did likewise, only after going to his purse, and then Lord Dolph also saw the bet. The action passed to the young knight. "Let us see with whom fortune actually plays," Sir Margus said as he casually flipped his next flat ivory rectangle so as to show its face, a black sigil. "Cities and magic don't mix, sir," urged Lord Dolph. "Let's get on with it." Without any indication that he took offense at the mustached baron's rudeness, the young man lazily reached for his next plaque and tipped it. He ruminated, eyes now fixed upon the baron. A bet was again demanded by the rules of the game, for Sir Margus had but 2 tiles remaining face down. It was evident from the facial expressions of the other players that they did not envy him his position. Already in deep, he had but little chance to defeat the cleric's host, while the Baron Dolph had some considerable opportunity. Let us be restrained, lucky, offered the young knight. As the electrum disc went into the center of the table, Lord Dolph was already shoving 2 coins in. And an orb, he said with menacing flatness in his voice. Margus had but a few pieces of currency before him on the table, and the Baron thought it time to force the upstart youngster out of the play. Each of the others at the table saw the wager. Sir Margus stared at the glitter of gold, silver, platinum, and electrum in the pot, shook his head, and stared at the Baron. As Dolph smiled condescendingly at him, a gold coin appeared in the young man's hand, and he said, "I'll see the wager also." Now everyone at the table was watching with enhanced interest. This hand was becoming a personal matter of pride between 2 noblemen, and by this time the game had attracted the attention of a small crowd of onlookers. They kept a respectful distance, and after each play, the ones in the front ranks would turn and whisper the latest happenings to those behind them. Sir Margus glanced toward the spectators and smiled faintly, as if amused by a secret joke. Then he revealed his 6th pluck. Madame Baldray gasped and clutched at the golden brocade over her gown with a plump hand when she saw a white sigil. Sir Margus fixed Lord Dolph with a piercing gaze, holding the Baron's eyes as the young villainous knight slowly displayed his next pluck. Several of the onlookers voiced subdued cheers when the second dragon in the stack appeared. That could stand for the green sigil exposing Madame Baldray's tableau. Now the young nobleman had completed the mage, a nearly unbeatable display. "I believe it is your play, Baron," Sir Margus said laconically, without looking down. Leave it, Lord Dolph reached for his next tile. It was the elf. No help. Hurriedly, he turned the next another tower, and it was time to consider the stakes. "A plate, I say, and be damned!" His hand shook as the paunchy Baron but put the coin into the pot with an angry toss. Madame Baldray yelled at her tableau. She could no longer hope luck would save her. The cleric and the villainous knight put platinum lozenges into the pot without ado. Guildmaster Arentol observed the whole affair with fascination. "Estus, that's 5 towers you now face!" roared the Baron as his 6th pluck turned out to be another of the castle symbols. Lord Dolph's tableau was now supreme on the board. His florid countenance was wreathed in smugness as he looked from High Priest Bronstein to Sir Margus, his pale eyes red-rimmed but gloating. "Calmly, dear Baron, calmly," admonished the haughty-faced cleric as he carefully exposed his 5th tile. The blue horse's head was some help, but not much, especially in the face of 5 towers. I must trust in the divine direction I now require," he stated. He flipped an orb into the air and let it fall on the table before him. He showed a throne. "Tops, so I am to go on. Consider the gold piece my fresh warrior," he said. Neither of the other players increased this sum, so the cleric continued his play. His 6th tile was yet another war piece, a black sword. After a moment of hesitation, perhaps for silent prayer, Bronstein revealed his 7th and last pluck. It was incredibly, a red horse head, cavalry. "I offer you the allied host," the cleric said with a casual gesture toward the green infantry pieces and trio of horses. Is it not the superior of 5 towers? Now it was High Priest Bronstein's turn to sit back and watch, for this seemed the end of all hopes for his opponents. Before Sir Margus could play, Lord Dolph exclaimed, "We're men here, I believe, and it seems time that we show what we are made of. I say we make an additional wager on who shall have the winning tableau when all plucks are exposed. What say you, Bronstein?" By pointedly ignoring the young knight, Lord Dolph was indicating that he thought Sir Margus would not have sufficient funds or perhaps the fortitude to continue. With his allied host before him, the cleric acquiesced with a smile. The Baron then placed 6 orbs into the pot. Even the priest was startled at that, but he reached into his sash and withdrew, a like amount, still smiling, but now shaking his head as if saddened by the gambling lust of the others at the table. Now it was up to Sir Margus. If he met the added stake, he took out a flat purse and appended it before him. Out dropped 5 coins, 4 orbs and a plate. He added this to his stack of 5 luckies on the table, but he was still short of the wager. Desperately, the young man dug in his tunic breast pocket, there finding 3 more electrum coins. He sat back with dejection on his face. "Well, sir, now, sir," crowed the Baron, "you seem to be a single lucky short of making the 6 orbs additional wager. By the rules of play, you now stand forfeit." In desperation, the villainous knight looked around the table at the others. "Will one of you kind folk, nobles all, not lend me a single lucky so that I may continue the test?" he asked in a friendly tone. Stony eyes and hard faces were the only reply to this. Then, just as Lord Dolph was about to demand once again that he yield his tiles, the knight held up his hand and snapped his fingers. "Why, how foolish of me!" he exclaimed. "In the heat of the play, I seem to have forgotten all about my just peace." With that, he shoved his chair back, tugged off the tooled leather boot from his left foot, and tipped the thing upside down over his hand. He placed the worn electrum coin on top of the others, pushed the stack into the pot, and said offhandedly, "My play, I suppose." The knight's 7th tile was black, and the last of the sigil in the stack. A great coup indeed. "My tableau now displays the Archmage, battering his Reverence Vronstein's allied host," announced Sir Margus. "And your 5 towers as well, Baron, unless you can best it with that single plaque you have yet undisclosed." The face of Lord Dolph turned nearly purple, and he sputtered as he reached for the tile. "Now you, sir, hold, sir, I say," the villainous knight commanded. "You have belittled me without stint since this game began. You have tested my temper, my purse, and my spirit. Now let us test yours. I have no coin left, but here upon my finger is a ring of bright gold with the fair grin of a cat's eye chrysoberyl peering forth. A family treasure of value both sentimental and otherwise. Though it is worth far more. Let us say it has the value of a mere 3 orbs. If you have meddled, sir, you will accept this additional stake. Here you turn your final tile." No noble could turn from such a challenge. Though Lord Dolph would doubtless never forgive the challenger. He glared with open hatred at the young villainess. "You say it has greater value? Then so be it. I wager 3 plates, not 3 orbs, against it." "Turn your tile then, Baron, and may the better man win." The plague bore the grinning face of the thief Baron Dolph had lost. Later, in a lavish suite at the Villa Noblesse, 3 young people were lounging and drinking, toasting the occasion with hideous sparkling violet wine from Ulex southern region. A pile of gold discs, platinum rectangles, and electrum coins were arrayed as a centerpiece. "You're absolutely crazy, Gord," said the curvaceous, I can't read the name, there is an error, sorry. "I told I faint when you couldn't meet the Baron's extra stakes, and then the ring, marvelous." "Marvelous? Perhaps," interjected the tall blonde youth called Sunray. "Yet I must know how you turned that sigil." "I cheated," Gord said without inflection. "What?" cried Teline. Okay, Teline is the name of the first, sorry. Logging and reaching over to hug him. "How could you have cheated? The silly Madame Beldray dealt the plaques." "I'm good, no one saw me, but I changed the last plaque dealt to me for one I chose, the black sigil." "With the guild masters at the table?" "Oh, so what, Teline?" Sunray chimed in. "Big deal. Everyone was watching the coins tossed into the pot. It was obvious that Sunray was trying to steal the limelight from Gord Margus, jealous of his success and the attention it gained him from their family companion. But even so, how did he know that Lord Dolph didn't have the 5th tower?" Tellin demanded, addressing Sunray and then looking to Gord. Gord smiled his most boyish grin at her and simply said, "I didn't." End of chapter 8. So he earned a fortune with the gambling. Had a lot of risk too. So, we summarize up for today for the last chapter, chapter 9. Another 8 page, and then we end it here for today. But before, a brief pause of 2 minutes, I think, not so much. Oh, yeah. Okay, let's continue. Chapter 9, right? Let's go. Oh, yeah. My poor knees. Okay. Chapter 9, the last one for today. Chapter 9. Okay, good. It had been more than 2 years now since Gord had left the university and come to the northern portion of Greyhawk, moving back and forth from High to Garden Quarter, as his whim or opportunity dictated. In one guise or another, Gord had plied his profession as thief among the most wealthy and powerful citizens of the city without a qualm. Never once had he been detected, although suspicion occasionally had forced him to retire one persona and assume a new one. By choosing carefully and striking infrequently, he had kept the officials of the city guessing as to what was going on. A great many of his operations had been so well conceived and well executed that the victims were left unaware that they had been swindled, cheated, or robbed. The game earlier this week, for instance, 3 orcs could support a man modestly for a year, and Gord had virtually stolen more than 10 times that much from the other players. Telline, Sunray, and Gord were part of an active, loosely associated group who plied the arts and crafts of thievery without license from the guild or acknowledgement of the guild's authority. It should go without saying that no portion of their illicit gains crossed the palms of the guild leaders, and thus no funds from these operations came into the coffers of the city and its officials. Thievery was at best a dangerous profession, for despite the influence of the guild and the implicit sanction of its actions by the officials of Greyhawk, the laws were still the laws. A thief caught in the act was subject to a range of punishment going from bondage all the way to execution in various horrible ways. However, members of the guild were safe from prosecution so long as they avoided discovery on the job, reported their activities afterward, and paid their tithe. Disgruntled citizens seeking retribution had little recourse against the guild, save personal challenge or the hiring of an assassin. Vendettas involving the Thieves Guild were not healthy pursuits. Outside the guild, however, a thief had no protection. In fact, both victim and guild, with the full cooperation of the city, sought to bring such criminals to justice. Of course, this just made things more exciting for the rebellious thieves who elected to operate outside all boundaries. Most of the non-guild activity was not robbery or burglary, although there was enough of that. The majority of these operations were of the sort that Gord had just enacted, involving impersonation, cheating, fraud, and the like. Few such swindlers were detected, and few of those detected were talked about, but there was still plenty of heat upon the swindlers from both the guild and the law enforcement arm of Greyhawk. The perpetrators were actively sought, their fences haunted, their accessories held as guilty as the actual perpetrators. This made the group a tightly knit fraternity, cautious, clever, and close-mouthed. Some operated only in the upper sector of the new city, some only in the lower rugged districts, but all were aware of each other, by reputation at least. Gord's favorite pseudonym was the Grand Count, a title that played on his sides, his impersonation of noblemen, and the size of his gains. Old Tug lately had been partial to his newly developed masquerade as one Sir Margus. In point of fact, the take from gambling was small compared to the profit from many of his other operations, and the proceeds from his recent triumph were enough to support Gord and his two associate thieves for no more than a month, living in the high style they favored. Gord had changed but little since the day he quit the pursuit of knowledge and resumed his profession. By then, at the age of 16, he had grown to some 5½ feet in height, and his skinny frame had filled out with lean muscle. His beard had been heavy and dark then too, and his voice surprisingly deep for one with such slight build. Sorry, my cat fell from the table. Sorry. Okay. His skill at disguise and acting enabled him to appear younger or older as he desired, or a young man in his early 20s, according to need. Ever since his first introduction to disciplined physical exercise, he had grasped its vital importance to his continued success, and Gord never abandoned the routine of workouts and rigorous effort. And he had made an effort to keep improving himself in other ways as well, gaining instruction and information from whatever source was available. Gord was a quick study and a good student in all ways. His grey eyes showed that he took things seriously and that he had purpose. He was never satisfied that he had learned enough about some subject. Although he understood that he must sometimes abandon one course in order to examine another more fully. Of all his studies in Clarkburg, Gord had most hated to give up the weapon work. Returning for regular session to the university district would have been impossible. But, of course, there were other weapon masters in Grey Oak, so Gord had managed to continue his learning. The problem was that each change of identity required a change of tutor. Appearances might deceive, but never fighting style. And his swordmaster who had engaged in weapon play with Gord would recognize his style blindfolded, in a manner of speaking. That he would soon run out of instructors bothered Gord not a little. Teline had not committed herself to either Sunray or himself, and that bothered Gord far more. His concern came from the friction it caused between them as much as from his desire for her, and that was the truth. Gord had pondered the situation at length. There were plenty of other beautiful and talented women in Grey Oak. He wanted Teline, but if she chose Sunray over him, that would be an acceptable turn of fate, and he could look elsewhere for companionship. It seems that Teline enjoyed the rivalry too much to make a choice, however, and the resulting strain upon the two young men was eroding the mutually beneficial relationship they had all enjoyed in the past. The three of them used to do everything together, but now either Sunray or Gord was alone half the time. Gord planned capers for himself and Teline, and Sunray likewise developed adventures that left Gord on the outside. Gord had been left alone on this night, actually, and had been none too pleased with the fact. Thus he acted a bit rashly, he notes, again donning his Sir Margus gears and venturing forth to see what delights the night might hold. No link boy was needed to light the streets in high quarter. Cressets and lamps hung from its buildings made the streets bright enough. No escort was necessary either, for the broad thoroughfares were well patrolled by the watch and observed by many private guards in addition. Gord had no need for either torch-bearer or protector, having grown up in the darkness and danger of the old city's worst sections, but as a Villainous knight of few years and unknown capabilities visiting the metropolis of Grey Oak, he would have been obliged to have them for show had the quarter been anything other than it was. He determined to stay within the warmly illuminated avenues of the place, and to stray neither into its more dimly lit, seductive by ways nor beyond its boundaries. With him, as always, was the small sword of finest craftsmanship, which he had disguised with gold wire and gewgaws to appear the trapping of a dandy rather than a weapon, and his familiar old dagger and knife. The former, also embellished, hung at his right hip. The latter was nestled out of sight in his boot. His purse contained a total of 5 orbs value, in various types of coin, enough for fun and sportive gaming. The remainder of his winnings and the rest of other successes too was cleverly hidden as usual. Not even Sunray or Teline knew where he secreted this wealth. Damn them both! He would have his amusement without further thought of either. Avoiding the Patricians' Club, the establishment in which he had outfoxed Lord Dolph, he walked away from the Citadel toward the less prosperous section where Ig and Garden quarters met. There was more excitement to be had there and less risk posing as a Velounese. It was unlikely that he ran into anyone thereabouts who knew Sir Margus. He strolled toward the door of the Nymph and Satyr, selected it as a good place to begin, and in a minute was seated and quaffing his first tankard, casually observing the clientele. Sir Marcus, how pleasant to find you here! The voice from just behind his shoulder startled Gord, for he usually detected any nearby presence, a sixth sense almost. He turned hurriedly to cover his confusion. It was Arental, and the guildmaster was smiling slightly. I was just speaking of your marvelous success. Wrong voice. I was just speaking of your marvelous success the other evening, he said. Allow me to introduce my associate to you, for he was fascinated by the tale. Arental turned and beckoned. From the shadow of a nearby pillar stepped someone Gord knew well. Master son of Warwell, may I present Sir Margus of the noble Velounese house of Lewis. Sir Margus, Master son. Gord kept his eyes fixed on his old friend's face, but Son never showed a hint of recognition. Blandly Son responded, An honor indeed, sir, and gave a slight bow. Arental was not finished. Come and join us at our table, please. We too are poor company, but we offer fine drink, and a willing ear for your stories of far Veluna and your travels. The guildmaster was all warmth and smiles as he touched Gord's arm and gestured in the direction of his table across the room. It will be my distinct pleasure, honorable guildmaster and Master Son. Yes, by all means, said Gord with equal friendliness, moving with them. Let us share a cup or two, and I shall gladly tell you all about my wonderful homeland and the exciting adventures I've experienced since living in that fair place. Gord gave both fellows an ingenuous smile. Serving maid, he cried out as they reached the table. We need your ministrations here. If the Lord of Grey's head thief thought to test Gord on his knowledge of Veluna and the lands around, he had not reckoned with that worthy's previous schooling. While Gord had never been more than a mile beyond the walls that encircled the city, he had spent many hours reading history, studying geography, and hearing lectures on such faraway places. Perhaps Arental thought Son's smiles were due to the elaborate lengths Gord went to in the near monologue that ensued, or perhaps he attributed the cheerfulness to the young man's ability to storytell. Gord knew that his old chum was secretly longing deep inside, as Gord related nearly word for word what both had heard from a particularly dry and windy professor. Gord intermixed a bit of his own fanciful creations with all, but the context was unmistakable. Finally, after nearly 2 hours and many draughts of the most expensive liquor the establishment offered, Arental broke in. And that ring on your finger? As I recall, you said it was a valuable family heirloom when you wagered it at the game. A ring? Gord allowed his gaze to move idly to the piece of jewelry on his finger as his mind raced. He had underestimated the guildmaster. A mistake. He had underestimated the guildmaster. A mistake. "You mean this?" he said, holding up the crucible rail and moving it slightly so that the large green cat's eye winked back and forth in the light. "Great Foltus, no! This Trantulum is no family treasure, I mean." Gord used his utmost duplicity to make the world sound like indifferent and demanding speech. "Odd," commented the guildmaster. "I'd have sworn that you said it was a treasure." "No matter. But if it is no family heirloom, where from came it?" "Haha, you are on it, clever fellow. It is worth a bit of coin, and it does mean much to me. You guessed the tale, so now I shall relate it for you." At first the guildmaster seemed interested, but after several minutes of preamble, he began to shift restlessly in his seat. He politely suggested that Gord get to the point. Gord assured him he was doing that, and then the young man went on to tell of a meeting with a devious gypsy and his band of sullen cutthroats. How they had tried to first dupe, then overwhelm him, and how he had finally slain the leader in a single combat, thus gaining the ring. At this, Arental grumbled softly and abruptly, excusing himself to go to the Gygax. After letting a couple of minutes pass in silence, Sans spoke. "You put him off, Gord," he murmured, with his flagon held before his mouth. "He is suspicious of you now, and he'll never stop until he finds out for sure, one way or another, whether you are who you claim to be." Sam cast a glance over his shoulder, checking to see if Arental was on his way back to the table, while he waited for a response. Clearly nervous for himself as well as for his friend of old, he faced Gord again and with sad eyes gave him a last whispered piece of advice. "You'd best get out of Greyhawk while you can." Gord smiled but drained his cup instead of replying. The guildmasters returned, and within moments thereafter Sir Margus graciously took his leave. Teline found the note first and read it aloud to Sunray. "My dear friends, I am so sorry I must leave without proper farewell. But a messenger from my family has brought me news that I am urgently required in Veluna. Do visit if you ever should come there. Your most loving servant, Margus." "What is this shit?" demanded Sunray. Teline looked up from the note, her face contorted in anger. "That bastard has skipped with everything!" she shrieked. That was a lie. Gord had left a pair of lackeys next to the note. End of chapter 9. For today is all. We read a lot of pages today. Almost 2 hours of live. I think. I don't really know. An hour and a half. Okay, good. So, for today is all. Tomorrow we continue with another 3-4 chapters. I don't really know the exact numbers, but for today is all. So, have a good evening, night, have a good something, and my messy air, okay, never mind, and bye to the next time.